Well, did we make a compelling case for Kantianism? And what I mean by that is, have we given serious reason to consider that maybe it's not so much the consequences of our actions that carry moral weight? Maybe it's the actions and our motivations that do. Maybe what matters is not the result of our efforts. It's the specific actions that we take and the reasons that motivate us to take those particular actions. We're going to look at a theory this week, another non-consequentialist theory that again says consequences are irrelevant. What matters is what you do and why you do it, what your motivations and intentions are. And this theory that we're going to look at this week, this non-consequentialist theory, is called natural law theory. And as you kind of start your journey into this theory, there's a question that I want you to be thinking about, maybe even think about it before you do anything related to this week's work. And I would frame the question like this. It seems pretty clear that nature has a particular way of being. When we look out at the universe, there seems to be an order to things. Things seem to function in a particular way. And we can sort of intuit or deduce this way that things are and the way that things seem to work. And so my question is, does that provide any basis for determining how we should live? In other words, in ethics, we usually think of ourselves as facing what we would call the is-ought gap, right? That we always find ourselves at a particular moment in time when we're faced with a decision where there are certain conditions that simply exist. There are certain facts that we have at hand when we're facing this decision. And we're trying to get to a set of circumstances that we think ought to exist, or something, a certain set of circumstances that should exist. And so therefore the action that gets us to that place is the right action. Is it possible that nature can be instructive in this effort to determine what the right thing to do is? Okay, and so that's kind of the question that I want you to consider as you begin this journey is it possible to derive from what is what ought to be? Now, I gotta confess up front, man, I have not figured out a way to sell natural law theory effectively over all these years. I've tried a bunch of different ways. I've redone this unit a bunch of times. And I can't figure out a way to sell it as a theory. And what I mean by sell it is not convince you that it's true or convince you that you should live by it. What I mean is that I don't think I've been very successful at giving people reason to think that it's worth serious consideration. That of all of the ethical theories that we look at in this course, this one seems to get the least amount of purchase with folks. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. It may be, this is my suspicion, it may be that folks pick up pretty early on sort of similarities to religious ways of thinking about ethics, traditionally religious ways of thinking about ethics, or they may pick up on this idea, not pick up on is the right word, they may incorrectly deduce that the embracing natural law theory necessarily requires that you embrace some particular conception of God. That's kind of my suspicion. So I'm able to give, I think, a fairly compelling case for egoism and utilitarianism and libertarianism, Kantianism, and so on and so forth. And what I mean by that is I'm able to give people reason to take those theories seriously and to recognize their competing strengths and weaknesses and to give them sort of a fair evaluation. But again, I feel like I'm just semester after semester failing to do this with natural law theory. And so one thing that I would ask you to think about as you explore natural law theory is there a way to see natural law theory as perhaps compatible with some ethical theories that you might be more inclined to accept? So I think in particular about like deep ecology or biocentrism, these ethical theories that have arisen in the last 40, 50, 60 years that claim that yes, the universe and nature in particular is organized in a particular way, and we can find instructions for how to live ethically if we understand the functioning of nature. So like the easiest example to see here is this idea of interdependency, right? That when we look at ecosystems, we see that all of the different constituent elements of an ecosystem are all interdependent with one another. Nothing exists in isolation in an ecosystem. And so environmentalists and different environmental ethicists have drawn the conclusion based on that fact of what is this phenomenon of interdependency, that has implications for how we relate to one another as human beings, maybe as a global community, and see ourselves less as separate sort of nations on a globe and more as interdependent tribes of people. And that's a way of thinking that's very similar to natural law theory, in the sense that it's looking out at the way that nature seems to be organized and some of its features, and then drawing from that an ethical conclusion about how we ought to live. So as you're working through natural law this theory, I need you to help me. Help me figure out a way to make the best case that we can for natural law theory being a theory that deserves to be taken seriously, or at least deserves some serious consideration. And of course, we need to point out its flaws too, because as with every ethical theory we look at, there are always flaws. Sorry, we're not going to stumble on the one of these weeks that is the flawless ethical theory that you're like, my word, there it is. Now I've got it. I know my path. That's not going to happen. All of these theories have their various strengths and weaknesses. All right, so have fun with natural law theory this week, and I really look forward to chatting with you about it on the discussion board.